Today we're going to review Chapter 2 notes. If you follow along in your note packet, Chapter 2 begins with different types of data. You have qualitative data and quantitative data. Qualitative data is going to be when you're describing something, like describing the bubbles that you did the lab with. You're describing what they look like, the texture, what they feel like. Quantitative data is going to be numerical data. So when you write your hypothesis versus your statistical hypothesis for your lab reports, hypotheses will be qualitative and your quantitative hypotheses will be like your statistical hypotheses. So qualitative you're describing, quantitative you're adding those numbers. If you skip over in your packet and you skip over a couple pages, you'll see chemistry Chapter 2 notes. And if you're looking at that, the first thing it starts with is proteins are made of chains of amino acids. And we discussed this in class. If you put amino acids together, you're going to make proteins. And what you're going to have is you're going to have polypeptides that hold those amino acids together. And you have to have proteins for life. They're essential. And proteins make up 1/4 of the dry weight of all of the cells in your body. So lots of proteins in there. Proteins are large, they're complex molecules, they play critical roles in your body, and they do most of the work in the cells that are required for your structure, function, and regulation of your body tissues and organs. And proteins are made up of hundreds of thousands of small units called those amino acids, and those are strung together in long chains. There's about 20 different types of amino acids in your body, and those get combined to make proteins. And the sequence of amino acids determines each protein's unique three-dimensional structure. So proteins can be described based on the functions they have in your body. So proteins are very, very important. One of the other types of nutrients that you're going to need inside your body is going to be carbohydrates. And we discussed in class, carbohydrates always include carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So if you think about the word carbohydrates, there's a C in there, there's an H, and there's an O. And on the periodic table, those would stand for carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the ratio of carbons to hydrogens to oxygens in a carbohydrate are always going to be 1 to 2 to 1. So 1 carbon, 2 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. And you're going to get carbohydrates in a wide range of foods that you eat. Bread, beans, milk, popcorn, potatoes, cookies, spaghetti, all kinds of foods that you eat have carbohydrates in them. It just depends. You can eat good carbs versus bad carbs. So there's some carbs that are better than other carbs. So like legumes and beans are going to be a better carb for you than a big slice of chocolate cake. You need carbohydrates to supply you energy, but you want an energy that's going to be sustained for longer. You don't want your energy to spike and then crash after that. So that's why some carbs are better than others. Carbs are stored in muscles for exercise. Carbohydrates provide vitamins, minerals, and fiber, and there's 1 gram of carb for every 4 calories. So 1 gram of carb equals 4 calories. You also need fat. You have to have so much fat to sustain life. So you have lipids, and lipids are fats, oils, waxes, and steroids. So lipids are really important. One example other than humans is lipids are important in birds, because in birds they will use their beak and they'll do something called preening, and they will get some oil on their beak and oil up their wings to keep them in good working order, and that also helps ducks to float and birds to fly. So it helps their wings stay in good working order. So oils and lipids are good for many reasons. Some examples are you have lipids, and we just discussed you have fats, oils, waxes, and proteins. You cook with certain oils. Of course, some are better than others. Coconut oil is supposed to be very good for you. You have waxes, which are on the outside of apples and pears, and that protects the fruit. And then you have steroids, and you have natural steroids in your body, like vitamin D. And then, of course, you can get corticosteroids injected into your body. And, of course, you have people that will take anabolic steroids, which can build muscle but can have very bad side effects. So those are the types of lipids, and you have to have fat inside your body for insulation and for keeping you warm, and so you do need a certain percentage of body fat. The problem is that a lot of people in the Western civilization, Western world, which is us, have too much body fat, and that's when that happens, that creates issues. The next thing in your notes discusses pH, and the pH scale, as we've discussed in class, ranges from 0 to 14. 7 is your neutral number, below 7 is acidic, and above 7 is going to be alkaline or basic. We've also discussed compounds and molecules in class, and if you go back, make sure you look at that list of the order of organization of life. And in the last audio lecture for Chapter 1, we discussed the order of organization of life, and in that presentation you will hear all about atoms and molecules. So when you're looking at compounds and you're looking at the chemistry of life, you have many different components. You have monomers, which are like small building blocks, and if you put a bunch of polymers together, if you put a bunch of monomers together, you're going to get a polymer. And polymers are really strong, and Klockner Pentaplast and Rural Retreat and Virginia Tech both do research with polymers because polymers are in things like plastic bottles, your car tires, and products that you use every day. Plastic sheeting, which is cut and used for like Little Debbie cakes, those types of things all have polymers. The other things that you're going to hear about when you talk about the chemistry of life is you're going to hear about in carbohydrates, there's various different types of carbohydrates. There's monosaccharides, disaccharides or oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. And the simplest is going to be a monosaccharide. And then if you put a couple of those together, you'll get a disaccharide. And if you put a bunch of monosaccharides together, you'll get a polysaccharide. And of course, the poly is the most complex, and the mono is the least complex. We also discussed in class solutions. Solutions would be like sugar water, something you can't separate back out, versus a mixture, which is like chocolate chip cookie batter. You can go in there and still pluck out the chocolate chips and eat them out of the batter. That's a mixture, and the sugar water is the solution. And in class, we also discussed the difference between the solute and the solvent. And if you remember the example, the lute is in the beaker, and the hydrochloric acid dissolved the lute. So solute gets dissolved, and the solvent would be the hydrochloric acid that is doing the dissolving. We also discussed in class the characteristics of water. Water can be frozen, and unlike other substances, water will expand when it freezes. Water is polar. It has opposite charges. The hydrogens and oxygens have opposite charges, so water clings together. Water on the top of a surface, like a pond, will create surface tension, where all of those water molecules are clinging together due to those opposite charges, which will create a little thin sheet on top of the water, which allows bugs to be able to cross across the water like water striders. Some of the other things that we talked about in class in Chapter 1 and 2 were the microscope, so make sure that you know the parts of the microscope for the lab practical and the functions of each structure. One other thing, if you flip back to where you started on Chapter 1 and 2 notes, where it says Notes Chemistry at the top, you will see levels of classification, and we'll discuss this more whenever we get to the classification unit. But when you're classifying organisms, the way that you classify is the broadest category is going to be kingdom. Then you're going to have phylum, and then class, then order, followed by family, genus, and species. And when you have a species name, which you're going to see all throughout your textbook, the species name is going to be written in italics, and the first word is going to be capitalized, and the second word is not going to be capitalized. And an example is Homo sapiens, which are humans, which translates to mean wise man. And you also have things like Drosophila melanogaster, which is the species name for fruit flies. So this concludes our review of the notes for chemistry, and then we will have later on, you will have an audio file for some sample test questions.